Please, save my sister first, begs a poor girl to the Korean Mafia boss. What he did next made her cry. On January 23, 2019, on a night carved by icy winds in the quiet city of Gwangyang, two foreign sisters were found trying to stay warm behind a dim bus stop swallowed by snow. Hours later, a hidden metal object inside the older sister's coat revealed a symbol connected to the silent empire of a powerful local figure. And when he arrived at the hospital, the fate of the girls changed in a way no one could have foreseen. What truly happened that night? And why was that object left exactly where they lived? Follow the channel, like the video, and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. The snowflakes fell like tiny shards of glass over Gwangyang that February night, each one cutting through the silence of the industrial district with a whisper that seemed to carry forgotten prayers. The kind of cold that settles into your bones and makes you question whether warmth was ever real at all. Behind a rusted bus stop shelter, barely visible beneath layers of cardboard and torn plastic sheets, two small figures huddled together. Nalaya, 11 years old with eyes that had seen far too much for someone who should still believe in fairy tales, wrapped her threadbare jacket around her baby sister Amale. The fabric was so thin it might as well have been paper, but it was all she had. All they had. Nalaya's fingers, red and swollen from the cold, trembled as she adjusted the makeshift blanket around Amale's tiny body. The baby's breathing came in shallow, rattling gasps that made Nalaya's heart clench with a fear she couldn't name. She had learned not to cry anymore. Tears froze on your face out here, and frozen tears meant questions from strangers, and questions meant people who promised help but disappeared like morning fog. The distant hum of an engine broke through the wind's monotonous howl. Headlights carved through the darkness, illuminating the falling snow in golden columns. Nalaya's body went rigid. Visitors to this abandoned corner of Gwangyang at this hour never brought good news. The black sedan rolled to a stop 15 meters away. The door opened, and a man stepped out, tall, wearing a coat that probably cost more than anything Nalaya had ever owned in her entire life. Two other figures emerged from the vehicle, their movements precise and professional, like dancers who had rehearsed this choreography 1,000 times. Ji Seong-min stood still for a moment, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air as he surveyed the desolate bus stop. His assistant had reported something unusual in this area during their route inspection, but nothing could have prepared him for what he was seeing now. A child, two children, alone, in this weather. His feet moved before his mind fully processed the decision. As he approached, the cardboard shifted, and a small face appeared, dirty, exhausted, but with eyes that held a shocking clarity, eyes that were already calculating, already preparing for disappointment. Seong-min opened his mouth to speak, to ask the questions that seemed obvious. Where are your parents? How long have you been here? Are you hurt? But before a single word could escape his lips, the little girl's voice cut through the night like a knife through silk. Please, save my sister first. The words hung in the frozen air between them, so heavy with desperation and resignation that Seong-min felt something inside his chest crack. Not break, crack. Like the first fissure in ice that's been frozen solid for years. In his 43 years of life, Ji Seong-min had heard thousands of requests, demands, pleas, business partners begging for mercy on failed contracts, employees asking for second chances, competitors offering anything for a partnership. But never, never had 5 words struck him with such devastating precision. This child wasn't asking him to save them both. She had already decided her sister's life was worth more than her own. At 11 years old, she had made a calculation that most adults spend their entire lives avoiding. What's your name? Seong-min asked, his voice rougher than he intended. Nalaya. The word came out as barely more than a whisper. My sister is Amale. She can't breathe right. Please, I don't need anything, just help her. Seong-min's assistant stepped forward with a blanket, but Seong-min raised his hand, stopping him. Instead, he removed his own coat, the Burberry wool blend that had been a gift from a business delegation, and wrapped it around both children before lifting them carefully. Amali's small body was frighteningly light, and her breathing sounded like wind whistling through a broken window. Both of you, he said firmly, looking directly into Nalaya's disbelieving eyes. I'm taking both of you. The drive to Gwangyang Medical Center took 12 minutes that felt like 12 hours. Seong-min sat in the back seat with the children, watching as Nalaya held her sister with a fierceness that seemed impossible for someone so small. The baby's breathing grew more labored with each passing minute, and Nalaya's face remained a mask of controlled terror. "How long have you been out there?" Seong-min asked quietly. "I don't know anymore," Nalaya whispered. "Time feels different when you're cold all the time. Maybe 3 weeks? 4? 3 weeks?" In February, in Gwangyang's industrial district, where temperatures regularly dropped below -10 degrees Celsius. The hospital's emergency entrance blazed with fluorescent light as they arrived. Medical staff rushed out with a gurney, and Nalaya was finally pried away from her sister by gentle but insistent hands. A pediatric nurse immediately noticed Amali's respiratory distress and called for oxygen. Dr. Hanya Reem, the head of pediatric emergency medicine, took one look at the baby and her expression shifted into something Seong-min recognized. The face of someone who had just realized this case would haunt them long after their shift ended. "We need to get her to respiratory care immediately," Yerim said, her voice calm but urgent. "How long has she been exhibiting these symptoms?" Nalaya tried to follow the medical team, but a nurse gently held her back. "They're going to help her, sweetheart. You need to be checked too." "I'm fine," Nalaya insisted, her voice cracking for the first time. "I'm always fine. Just help Amali, please." Seong-min found himself placing a hand on the girl's shoulder, a gesture he never made. Physical comfort was not his language, but something about her trembling defiance demanded it. A social worker appeared with a clipboard, asking questions that Seong-min found himself answering before he fully understood why. Yes, he had found them. No, he didn't know their full situation. Yes, he would stay until matters were resolved. As the administrative process unfolded, a nurse approached with Nalaya's jacket, the thin, inadequate thing that had been her only protection against the elements. "We're getting her into warm clothes," the nurse explained. This fell out of the pocket. In her hand was a small metallic card, scratched and dirty, but unmistakable. The embossed logo caught the fluorescent light, the stylized phoenix emblem of Seong-min Industrial Group's restricted access security system. The kind of card that only existed in corporate headquarters, in sealed facilities, in places where unauthorized entry triggered immediate security responses. Seong-min's blood turned to ice, not from cold this time, but from something far more dangerous. Recognition. The nurse held it out casually. "Should we keep this with her belongings?" But Seong-min couldn't move. His eyes were fixed on that small piece of metal, on the logo he had seen thousands of times, on the technology that represented his family's legacy. His mind raced through impossible calculations. How did a homeless child in an abandoned industrial district come to possess a security card from one of the most tightly controlled corporate facilities in South Korea? Dr. Yerim emerged from the treatment area, stripping off her gloves. "The baby is stable for now, but we need to run comprehensive tests. Her respiratory system shows signs of prolonged exposure to particulate matter, industrial pollutants most likely. I need to know exactly where these children have been living." Seong-min's mouth felt dry. "The area, it's near the discontinued Gwangyang Southeast complex. Some old warehouses, abandoned facilities. The complex he knew intimately. The complex his father had developed. The complex that had been mothballed 5 years ago after environmental concerns had forced renovations that never quite happened." Yerim's expression darkened. "We'll need to analyze the specific compounds. This kind of damage doesn't happen overnight." As she walked away to consult with her team, Seong-min stood alone in the harsh hospital corridor, holding a card that shouldn't exist outside secure walls, thinking about a child who had prioritized her sister's life over her own, in a place that connected somehow to his own past. His assistant approached quietly. "Sir, what would you like me to do about—" "Nothing," Seong-min interrupted, his voice low. "Tell no one about the card. Not yet." Through the window of the treatment room, he could see Nalaya sitting on an examination table, her eyes fixed on the door behind which her sister fought for breath. Even from this distance, even through glass and institutional walls, he could feel the weight of her desperate hope. And for the first time in 20 years, Ji Seong-min felt something he had trained himself to never feel in business, responsibility that extended beyond contracts and quarterly reports. The card felt heavy in his palm, impossibly heavy. The hospital's fluorescent lights hummed with an insistence that made everything feel surreal, like existing inside a photograph that had been overexposed. Seong-min sat in the waiting area outside the pediatric ward, the metallic card hidden in his inner jacket pocket, its presence burning against his chest like a piece of hot coal that refused to cool. 3 hours had passed since they'd arrived. 3 hours of watching medical staff rush in and out of Amali's room, of hearing machines beep with rhythms he didn't understand, of seeing Nalaya's small figure perched on a plastic chair that was too big for her, refusing to sleep, refusing to eat, refusing to do anything except wait. A social worker named Kim Min-ji approached with a tablet and an expression that tried to be gentle, but couldn't quite hide the exhaustion beneath. She was young, perhaps late 20s, with the kind of idealistic energy that hadn't yet been completely ground down by the system's countless failures. "Nalaya," Min-ji said softly, sitting down beside the girl. "I need to ask you some questions. Is that okay?" Nalaya's eyes remained fixed on the door to her sister's room, but she nodded slightly. "Can you tell me where you and Amali were staying before tonight?" "Near the old buildings," Nalaya whispered. "The ones with broken windows." There was a small space between 2 walls where the wind didn't reach as much. Minji's pen moved across her tablet. "And your parents? Other family members?" The girl's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Gone. It's just us now." Seong-min watched this exchange from his position near the vending machines, pretending to study his phone while every nerve in his body focused on the child's words. Each answer felt like another piece of a puzzle he didn't want to complete. "Nalaya," Minji continued, her voice even softer now, "I noticed you had something in your jacket pocket. A card. Do you know where you got it?" For the first time since the questioning began, Nalaya turned to look directly at the social worker. Her eyes held a wariness that made her seem ancient rather than 11. "I found it," she said simply. "Where did you find it?" "In a box, near where we were staying. There were some old containers, rusty ones. I thought maybe there would be something useful inside, something we could use or trade. There was just that card and some papers with words I couldn't read." Seong-min's grip on his phone tightened. "Papers? There were papers too." Minji made a note. "And you kept the card because—" Nalaya's expression shifted into something that might have been embarrassment. "It was shiny. I thought maybe if things got really bad I could trade it for food. Shiny things sometimes have value." The innocent logic of survival. Seong-min felt his throat constrict. Before Minji could ask another question, Dr. Han Ye-rim emerged from the treatment area, stripping off a surgical mask. Her face was drawn, and there were new lines around her eyes that hadn't been there 3 hours ago. Nalaya jumped to her feet instantly. She's stable," Ye-rim said quickly, and the relief that flooded the girl's face was almost painful to witness. "But we need to talk about what we've found." The doctor gestured for Seong-min and Minji to follow her to a small consultation room. Nalaya moved to follow as well, but Ye-rim gently stopped her. "I need to speak with the adults first, sweetheart. I promise I'll explain everything to you after. Your sister is sleeping comfortably right now, and a nurse is with her." Inside the consultation room, Ye-rim pulled up images on a computer screen. X-rays, charts, numbers that Seong-min recognized as test results, even if he couldn't interpret them. "The baby's respiratory distress is caused by prolonged exposure to airborne particulates," Ye-rim explained, her finger tracing patterns on the screen. "Not just regular dust or pollution. These are specific industrial compounds. Silicon dioxide, metal oxides, traces of chemical residue. The kind of exposure that happens in manufacturing facilities or areas where industrial waste has been improperly stored or disposed of." Seong-min's mouth went dry. How long would she need to be exposed for this kind of damage? Weeks at minimum, possibly months. Ye-rim pulled up another screen. "We ran a preliminary analysis on the particulate matter we extracted from her lungs. The composition matches—" She paused, checking her notes. "Matches a specific type of manufacturing byproduct used in electronics assembly and semiconductor production." The room suddenly felt too small. Seong-min knew exactly which facilities in Gwangyang had produced those kinds of byproducts. He knew because his family's company had owned 3 of them before the environmental regulations had forced shutdowns and relocations. "Doctor," Seong-min heard himself say, his voice sounding distant even to his own ears, "could you be more specific about the compound signature?" Ye-rim looked at him curiously. "Why? Do you have industrial knowledge?" "I work in the sector," he said carefully. "I might be able to help identify the source." She pulled up a detailed chemical breakdown. Seong-min studied it, and with each line he read, the sinking feeling in his stomach grew heavier. The compound ratios, the specific metal oxide combinations, the particular silicon dioxide processing markers. They all pointed to one thing: the discontinued Gwangyang Southeast Complex, specifically to Facility 7B, which had been sealed 5 years ago after inspectors found improper waste storage protocols. Facility 7B, which had been under the direct management oversight of Xiongmin Industrial Group. Facility 7B, which still technically belonged to his company, even though it had been mothballed and supposedly secured. This analysis, Xiongmin said slowly. You mentioned it was preliminary. Will you be conducting more detailed tests? Yes. We've sent samples to the National Environmental Health Institute. They'll be able to trace the exact source with more precision. Yerem crossed her arms. Mr. G, if you know something about where these children were living, you need to tell us. This isn't just about medical treatment. This is about environmental hazard and potentially illegal dumping. Before Xiongmin could respond, his phone buzzed. A message from his head of security. Sir, we've completed the background check on the security card as you requested. The serial number is registered to Facility 7B, Southeast Complex. Card was reported missing during the facility closure 5 years ago, presumed lost in administrative transfers. No alarm was triggered because the facility was already being decommissioned 5 years ago. The card had been missing for 5 years, and somehow it had ended up in a box near where 2 homeless children were trying to survive, in an area contaminated by waste from a facility his family owned. The coincidence was impossible, which meant it wasn't a coincidence at all. I need to see that card, Xiongmin said suddenly. Minji looked surprised. The security card? Why? Because, Seongmin said, choosing his words with surgical precision, I think it might help us understand exactly where these children were staying, which will help the doctor determine the full extent of their exposure. It was a reasonable explanation, a logical explanation. It was also incomplete, because the truth writhing in his mind was far more disturbing. Someone had left that card there. Someone wanted it found. Someone was sending a message. And he had a terrible feeling that the message was meant specifically for him. Dawn broke over Gwangyang with the kind of pale, hesitant light that suggested even the sun wasn't sure it wanted to witness what the new day might bring. Xiongmin hadn't slept. He'd spent the night in the hospital's administrative office, making calls that couldn't wait, and avoiding calls that could wait forever. The security card lay on the desk in front of him, now sealed in a plastic evidence bag that Minji had provided. Under the harsh desk lamp, the phoenix emblem seemed to mock him, a symbol of rebirth and renewal that now represented something far more sinister. His father had chosen that logo 30 years ago, believing it represented the family's rise from post-war poverty to industrial prominence. Looking at it now, Xiongmin wondered if phoenixes were less about rebirth and more about the ashes left behind. His assistant, Kwon Jae-sung, entered the office carrying 2 paper cups of convenience store coffee. The man looked as exhausted as Xiongmin felt, his usually immaculate appearance showing signs of the all-night vigil. Wrinkled collar, shadow of stubble, eyes rimmed with red. The legal team is ready whenever you need them, Jae-sung said quietly, setting 1 coffee in front of Xiongmin. But sir, they're asking questions I don't have answers to. What exactly are we preparing for? Xiongmin took a sip of the bitter coffee, letting it burn his tongue. Physical discomfort felt appropriate somehow. We're preparing for the moment when someone asks why 2 children were living in contaminated conditions near a facility we own, Jae-sung. We're preparing for the moment when that question becomes public. But we sealed that facility 5 years ago. We followed all the protocols. Did we? Xiongmin's voice was sharp enough to make his assistant flinch. Did we personally verify every waste container was properly disposed of? Did we conduct environmental testing of the surrounding area? Or did we simply sign the papers that other people prepared and move on to the next quarterly report? The silence that followed was answer. Enough. A knock on the door interrupted them. A young police officer entered, looking uncomfortable in the way that junior officers always did when dealing with people whose lawyers cost more than the officer's annual salary. Mr. G, I'm Officer Park from the Gwangyang District Station. I need to ask you some questions about the 2 minors you brought to the hospital last night. Seongmin gestured to a chair. Of course. Officer Park sat down, pulling out a standard incident form. We received a report early this morning from someone claiming that 2 foreign children matching the description of the girls you brought in had been reported missing 3 weeks ago. However, no formal missing persons report was ever filed with our station. Something cold slithered down Seong-min's spine. Who made this morning's report? A man claiming to be their uncle. He's on his way here now. Park flipped through his notes. He says the children's mother passed away 2 months ago, and he's been trying to locate them since they disappeared from a temporary housing situation in Yosu. Every instinct Seong-min had developed over 20 years of business negotiations screamed that something was wrong. The timing was too convenient, the information too prepared, the whole situation too neat. "Officer Park," Seong-min said carefully, "I'd like to be present when this uncle arrives. I want to see how the children react to him." The officer looked surprised. "Sir, with respect, you're not family. I'm not sure that's... Then I'm formally declaring my intention to serve as their temporary guardian until proper family connections can be verified." The words came out of Seong-min's mouth before his brain fully processed what he was saying. Jae-sung's coffee cup stopped halfway to his lips. Officer Park's pen froze mid-word. Even Seong-min himself felt a moment of vertigo, as if he just stepped off a cliff and was still falling. "Sir," Jae-sung said slowly, "do you understand what you're saying?" "Yes. No. Maybe." Seong-min understood the legal implications, the paperwork, the background checks, the social services interviews. What he didn't understand was why he'd just volunteered for it. He'd built his entire adult life around maintaining distance, around keeping business separate from personal, around never making decisions based on emotion. And yet here he was, declaring guardianship over 2 children he'd known for less than 12 hours, whose very existence threatened to expose uncomfortable truths about his family's legacy. "I understand perfectly," Seong-min said, his voice steadier than he felt. "Officer Park, what do I need to sign?" Before the officer could answer, Dr. Yerim appeared in the doorway, her expression grave. "Mr. G, Nalaya is asking for you. Her sister is awake and she wants to talk to someone about what happens next." Seong-min stood immediately, leaving the paperwork unfinished. He followed Yerim through the antiseptic corridors, past rooms filled with beeping machines and whispered conversations, until they reached the pediatric ward where Nalaya sat outside her sister's room. The girl looked smaller in the daylight, if that was even possible. Someone had found her clean clothes, a donated tracksuit that was 2 sizes too big, making her thin arms look like twigs poking out of oversized sleeves. Her hair had been washed and braided by one of the nurses, revealing features that should have belonged to a child planning birthday parties and worrying about school tests. Instead, when she looked up at Seong-min, her eyes held a question that no child should have to ask. "Are you going to leave us now?" Nalaya asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Now that people know we're here? Now that someone might come to take us away?" Seong-min crouched down so he was at her eye level, ignoring the protest from his knees and the shocked look from Jae-sung who had followed them. This wasn't something he did. He didn't crouch for anyone. He didn't make himself vulnerable, didn't put himself in positions where he had to look up at others. But somehow, looking down at this child while answering her question felt wrong. "No," he said firmly. "I'm not leaving. But you don't know us. We're nothing to you." The words hit harder than they should have. "You asked me to save your sister. I made that choice when I picked you both up. I don't walk away from my choices." It was a businessman's answer. Logical, transactional, safe. But Nalaya seemed to hear something beneath the words, something that Seong-min himself wasn't ready to acknowledge. "She's awake now," Nalaya said, standing up. "She asked where we were. I told her we were somewhere safe." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word, as if she wasn't entirely sure she believed it. "I told her someone was helping us. Was I wrong to tell her that?" Seong-min felt something twist in his chest, that same sensation from the night before, that crack in the ice he'd spent decades freezing. "You weren't wrong. Promise?" The word came out so quietly he almost missed it. He thought about all the promises he'd broken in business, all the contracts that had fine print, all the agreements that had escape clauses. He thought about the easy lie he could tell right now, the temporary comfort he could provide, before reality inevitably disappointed her. Instead, he heard himself say, "I promise. I'm going to make sure both of you have every chance you need." The words hung in the air between them, witnessed by a doctor who looked surprised, an assistant who looked terrified, and a girl who looked like she wanted to believe but had forgotten how. Behind them, Officer Park appeared with a heavy-set man in an expensive coat, too expensive for someone who supposedly couldn't afford to file a proper missing persons report. The man's eyes scanned the corridor until they landed on Nalaya, and something flickered across his face. Not relief, not love, something else entirely. "There you are," the man said in accented Korean, his smile too wide. "Uncle McKenna has been so worried." Nalaya's hand shot out and grabbed Seungmin's sleeve with a grip that felt desperate. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Her entire body had gone rigid, her breathing shallow, her eyes wide with something that looked terrifyingly close to panic. And Seungmin realized that the choice he'd just made, the promise he'd just given, was about to be tested far sooner than he'd anticipated. McKenna Dlamini carried himself with the confidence of a man who had rehearsed this moment in front of a mirror. His suit was tailored, not custom-made luxury, but the kind of off-the-rack precision that suggested someone who understood how to present success without actually possessing it. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine, his briefcase leather but worn at the corners in a way that felt calculated rather than earned. But it was his smile that made Seungmin's instincts flare like warning sirens. Too perfect, too practiced. The smile of someone who had learned to weaponize charm because genuine emotion had never been an option. "Nalaya, my dear child," McKenna said, taking a step forward. His voice carried the melodic accent of someone who had learned Korean as a second language, but spoke it with unsettling fluency. "You can't imagine how worried I've been. When you and little Amale disappeared from the shelter, I thought," his voice broke convincingly, "I thought I'd lost you both." Nalaya's grip on Seungmin's sleeve tightened until her knuckles went white. She said nothing. Her silence was louder than any scream. Officer Park consulted his notes, oblivious to the girl's distress. "Mr. Dlamini, you said you've been searching for 3 weeks." 23 days, McKenna corrected with impressive specificity. 23 days of checking every shelter, every aid organization, every place I thought they might have gone. He pulled out his phone, showing what appeared to be a well-organized digital folder. I documented everything, my search routes, the places I visited, the people I spoke with. Seungmin studied the phone screen over the officer's shoulder. The documentation was almost too perfect. Color-coded spreadsheets, time-stamped photos of various locations around Gwangyang and neighboring cities, even printed flyers with the girls' faces, though Seungmin noticed the photo quality suggested they'd been professionally taken, not the grainy smartphone pictures typical of actual family snapshots. "Mr. Dlamini," Seungmin interjected smoothly, "may I ask where exactly the children were staying before they disappeared?" McKenna's eyes flickered toward Seungmin, just for a microsecond, but long enough for Seungmin to catch the assessment happening behind them. This was a man calculating angles, weighing options, deciding how much truth to mix with fiction. "A temporary housing facility in Yosu," McKenna said, "managed by an NGO that helps immigrant families. After my sister passed," another perfectly timed pause, "I brought the girls there while I sorted out custody arrangements. International adoption laws are complicated, you understand. So much paperwork." "Which NGO?" Dr. Yerim asked, stepping forward. Her medical instincts had clearly picked up on something wrong in this picture as well. "Sunrise House Foundation," McKenna answered without hesitation. "You can verify with them if you'd like. I have the director's contact information." Too smooth, too prepared. Seungmin had spent enough time in boardrooms to recognize when someone had anticipated every question and prepared bulletproof answers. Officer Park seemed satisfied. "Well, Mr. Dlamini, if you can provide proper identification and documentation of your relationship to the children, we can begin the process of releasing them into your custody." "No." The word came from Nalaya, so quiet it was almost lost in the hospital's ambient noise, but everyone heard it. McKenna's smile never wavered. "Sweetheart, I know you've been through a traumatic experience. You're confused, probably scared, but Uncle McKenna is here now. Everything is going to be fine." I said no, louder this time. Nalaya's entire body was trembling, but she stood her ground. "I'm not going with you." The mask slipped. Just for a fraction of a second, McKenna's expression hardened into something cold and calculating, before the concerned Uncle facade snapped back into place. But Seungmin caught it. So did Yerim. "Officer Park," Yerim said firmly. "The child is clearly in distress. I'm recommending a psychological evaluation before any custody decisions are made. Hospital protocol requires that we ensure the children's mental and emotional well-being." McKenna's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Doctor, with respect, these children have been living on the streets. Of course they're traumatized. They need family, stability, not more institutional intervention. Then you won't mind waiting while we ensure that's what's actually best for them, Xiongmin said, his voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that came from years of shutting down boardroom challenges. He turned to Officer Park. As I mentioned earlier, I've declared intention to serve as temporary guardian. I believe that takes precedence until family claims can be properly verified. Makina's eyes narrowed slightly. And you are? Ji Seong-min. He didn't offer his hand. I found the children last night and brought them here. Until we're certain of their safety, they remain under medical care and, by extension, under my responsibility. Mr. Ji, Makina said, his tone shifting into something harder. I appreciate your concern, but these are my family members. I have documentation. I have proof of relationship. I have been searching for them for weeks. You're a stranger who happened to find them by chance. Legally speaking, I don't think you have any standing here. He was right, of course. Legally, Makina's position was stronger, but Seong-min had learned long ago that legal battles weren't won in the first confrontation. They were won through preparation, through finding the cracks in the opponent's armor. Then show us the documentation, Seong-min said calmly. Show us everything that proves your relationship and your right to custody. Officer Park can verify it all right here, right now. Shouldn't take more than an hour if everything is legitimate. The briefcase in Makina's hand shifted slightly, an unconscious protective gesture that told Seong-min everything he needed to know. Whatever was in that briefcase, Makina wasn't confident about scrutiny. Of course, Makina said after a pause that lasted 2 seconds too long. I have everything right here. He opened the briefcase with the careful precision of someone handling evidence at a crime scene. The documents he produced were impressively official-looking. Birth certificates for both girls, with Makina listed as maternal uncle, immigration papers, even a notarized custody agreement allegedly signed by their mother before her death. But as Officer Park examined them, Seong-min noticed something. The paper quality was too uniform, the stamps too perfectly aligned, the signatures too consistent. These weren't documents that had been carried around for weeks during a desperate search. These were documents that had been prepared specifically for this moment. Jae-sung, standing quietly behind Seong-min, leaned in and whispered almost imperceptibly, "Sir, I just received a message. That NGO he mentioned, Sunrise House Foundation, it exists, but they have no record of any family matching this description in the past 6 months." Seong-min's expression didn't change, but his mind raced. Makina had prepared fake documents, cited a real organization knowing most people wouldn't verify, and arrived at the hospital with impossible timing. Someone had told him exactly when and where to appear. "Mr. Dlamini," Seong-min said carefully, "how did you know the children were at this specific hospital?" Makina's smile didn't waver. "The police contacted me this morning after your assistant filed the initial report about finding 2 foreign children. Simple as that." But Officer Park looked confused. "Actually, sir, I don't think we made any external contacts yet. The report was still being processed when you arrived." The silence that followed was fractured by the sound of Makina's phone buzzing. He glanced at the screen, and for the first time since arriving, his composure cracked. Whatever message he'd received clearly wasn't what he'd expected. "I need to make a phone call," Makina said abruptly. "Officer, I'll return shortly with additional verification if needed. These children aren't going anywhere, are they?" It wasn't really a question. It was a threat wrapped in courtesy. As Makina walked away, phone pressed to his ear, Nalaya finally released her death grip on Seong-min's sleeve. She looked up at him with eyes that had seen too much, understood too much, survived too much. "He's lying," she whispered. "About everything. He never cared about us. He only came when—" She stopped, her face scrunching up as if trying to remember something important. "He only came when someone sent him messages. I saw his phone once. Messages with addresses, with instructions, with money." Seong-min crouched down again, meeting her eye level. "Do you remember anything about those messages? Anything at all?" Nalaya's small hand reached into her pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper, wrinkled and stained, but carefully preserved. "I took this from the trash at the shelter, before we ran away. I don't know why I kept it. I can't read all the words." Seong-min unfolded the paper, and his blood turned to ice. It was a printed email, dated 3 months ago. The header showed it had been sent from a corporate account. an account with a domain name he recognized immediately, seongminindustries.co.kr. The email's subject line read, Residential Clearance Protocol, Phase 2 Implementation. Below that, a string of coordinates that Seongmin recognized immediately as the exact location of the abandoned industrial complex where he'd found the girls. And at the bottom, instructions written in the cold, bureaucratic language of corporate efficiency. Ensure area is clear of unauthorized occupants before environmental assessment team arrives. Compensation arrangements as discussed. Seongmin's hand trembled as he held the paper. The sender's name was partially smudged, but the domain was unmistakable. Someone in his own company had sent this. Someone had known people were living in that contaminated area and had arranged to have them cleared, a sterile word that hid the violence of displacement. Mr. G? Dr. Yerim's voice cut through his spiral. Are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost. He wasn't sure how to answer that. Perhaps he had. The ghost of his father's legacy. The ghost of decisions made in climate-controlled offices by people who never had to see the consequences of their efficiency. Before he could formulate a response, Jae-sung's phone erupted with notification after notification, the buzzing growing frantic. His assistant's face went pale as he scrolled through whatever was flooding his screen. Sir, Jae-sung said, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. We have a problem. A massive problem. He turned his phone around. The screen showed a news article published 17 minutes ago by the Gwangyang Daily, a local news outlet known for its aggressive investigative journalism. The headline made Seongmin's stomach drop. Industrial Air intervenes in child welfare. Case, questions arise about corporate responsibility and environmental negligence. Below the headline was a photo, grainy but unmistakable, of Seongmin carrying Nalaya and Amale into the hospital the previous night. Someone had been there. Someone had been watching. The article itself was a masterpiece of inflammatory journalism, wrapped in a thin veneer of factual reporting. It mentioned the children's immigrant background, their homelessness, the proximity of their shelter to abandoned Seongmin Industrial Group facilities, and Seongmin's unusual personal involvement in what should have been a routine child welfare matter. Every sentence was carefully worded to avoid direct accusations while planting seeds of scandal. Within minutes, the story had spread across social media like wildfire. Seongmin's phone began buzzing with calls from board members, investors, legal advisors, all the people whose primary concern was corporate reputation rather than two children's lives. Don't answer, Seongmin said as Jae-sung reached for his own ringing phone. Not yet. We respond when we have our facts straight, not when we're reacting in panic. But the panic was already spreading. Through the hospital corridor windows, Seongmin could see news vans pulling into the parking lot. Reporters with cameras and microphones swarmed the entrance, held back only by confused security guards who hadn't been briefed on handling media invasions. Officer Park's radio crackled to life. His supervisor's voice, tense and irritated. Park, what the hell is going on at Gwangyang Medical? I've got 3 networks calling about some child welfare case involving the G family. Did you file a report that mentioned Seongmin Industrial? Park looked bewildered. Sir, I only filed a standard incident report about finding homeless minors. I didn't mention any corporate connections because I didn't know there were any. The pieces clicked together in Seongmin's mind with sickening clarity. Someone had leaked this story deliberately. Someone who knew he would be at the hospital, who knew about the children's location, who had access to enough information to construct a damaging narrative. This wasn't random journalism. This was a targeted attack disguised as news coverage. His phone buzzed again. This time, the caller ID showed Oh Dal-woong, Senior Vice President of Operations, and one of his father's oldest business associates. Seongmin almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. Seongmin. Dal-woong's voice was smooth, concerned, fatherly. All the things it had been since Seongmin was a boy learning the business. I just saw the news. This is unfortunate. Very unfortunate. I think you should step back from this situation before it damages the company further. Let the proper authorities handle the child welfare matter. You've done enough by bringing them to medical attention. Done enough? Seongmin's voice was quiet, dangerous. 2 children were living in contaminated conditions near our facility, Dal-woong, a facility we supposedly secured 5 years ago. A pause. Too long. Too calculated. Our facilities follow all safety protocols. If unauthorized individuals chose to trespass in restricted areas, That's not our corporate responsibility. They weren't trespassing, Xiongmin interrupted. They were surviving. There's a difference. Xiongmin, Dalwung's tone shifted, losing its warmth. Your father understood that business requires difficult decisions. Sometimes we have to protect the company's interests even when individual situations are unfortunate. The board is concerned about your emotional involvement in this matter. Several members are suggesting we issue a statement distancing the company from your personal actions. The threat was clear. Step back, or we'll make you the scapegoat. Through the window of Amali's room, Xiongmin could see Nalaya sitting beside her sister's bed, holding the baby's tiny hand. The girl was singing something. So quietly he couldn't hear the words, but he could see her lips moving, could see the way Amali's eyes tracked her sister's face with absolute trust. No, Xiongmin said. Tell the board I'll address them personally, but I'm not stepping back from these children. He ended the call before Dalwung could respond. Dr. Yarim approached with a tablet, her expression grim. Mr. G, I need to show you something. We received the full toxicology report from the National Environmental Health Institute. The contamination in Amali's lungs isn't just from ambient exposure. The chemical signature suggests direct contact with improperly stored industrial waste, the kind that should have been disposed of through regulated channels years ago. She pulled up a map on her tablet showing the industrial complex. Red dots marked contamination hotspots. The highest concentration was exactly where Nalaya had described finding the security card, in a storage area that records showed had been cleared and secured 5 years ago during the facility closure. Someone falsified the clearance reports, Xiongmin said, the realization settling over him like a lead blanket. Someone signed off on safety protocols that were never actually completed. And if that someone had access to your company's email system, Jae-sung added quietly, holding up his phone to show the forwarded email Nalaya had given them. They could have been covering up negligence for years. A commotion at the end of the corridor made everyone turn. Makina had returned, but he wasn't alone. Behind him stood a woman in an expensive suit, carrying legal documents and wearing the expression of someone who billed by the minute. Officer Park, Makina said, his earlier warmth replaced by cold efficiency. This is Attorney Choi Sun-hee. She represents my interests and the children's best interests. We're prepared to file an emergency custody petition based on documented family relationship and Mr. G's inappropriate interference in a child welfare matter. The media attention he's generated has created an unsafe environment for these traumatized children. The lawyer stepped forward, presenting papers with the confidence of someone who had won cases just like this 100 times before. We have documentation proving Mr. Dlamini's relationship to the minors, evidence of his extensive search efforts, and testimony regarding Mr. G's lack of legal standing in this matter. We're requesting immediate transfer of custody pending full legal review. Officer Park looked overwhelmed, caught between competing interests, and suddenly aware that whatever decision he made would likely end up on the evening news. But before anyone could respond, Nalaya's voice cut through the tension. Small, but unnaturally clear. He's not my uncle. He never was. He worked for someone who paid him to watch us, to keep us in that place until they needed us gone. Every adult in the corridor froze. The girl stood in the doorway of her sister's room, her small frame backlit by the medical equipment's soft glow, looking simultaneously terrified and absolutely certain. Nalaya, Makina said, his voice hardening. You're confused. The trauma has affected your memory. I remember everything, she said, and pulled out another piece of paper from her pocket. This one more recent, printed on the distinctive letterhead that made Seongmin's blood run cold. It was an internal memo from Seongmin Industrial Group, dated 2 weeks ago, with a digital signature at the bottom that Seongmin recognized immediately. The signature of Oh Dalwung, Senior Vice President of Operations. The memo trembled in Nalaya's small hands, but her voice remained steady, the kind of steadiness that came not from confidence, but from having already survived the worst, and discovering you were still breathing. The paper was creased and stained, as if it had been folded and refolded dozens of times, carried as evidence or insurance or simply proof that what she'd witnessed was real. Seongmin took the document from her with hands that felt numb. The letterhead was authentic. He'd signed thousands of documents with that same header over the years, but the content made his vision blur at the edges. Site clearance authorization. Facility 7B adjacent areas, read the subject line. Below it, in the sterile language of corporate memoranda. Authorization granted for immediate clearance of unauthorized residential structures in proximity to Facility 7B. Contract personnel to ensure area is vacant prior to environmental assessment scheduled for March 15th. Discretionary budget approved for relocation incentives if cooperation is secured. The date was February 20th, 5 days before he'd found the children in the snowstorm. Oh, Dalwung's digital signature sat at the bottom like an accusation. "Where did you get this?" Xiongmin's voice came out rougher than he intended. Nalaya's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back with the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned that crying changed nothing. "The man who came to our shelter. The one who said we had to leave. He dropped his folder when he was arguing with someone on the phone. I picked up the paper because it had a bird on it." She pointed at the Phoenix logo. "I thought maybe it was important. Maybe if things got bad, I could show it to someone who would help." Makina's lawyer stepped forward, her professional composure cracking slightly. "This document, if authentic, has nothing to do with Mr. Dlamini's custody claim. It's a separate corporate matter. It has everything to do with it." Dr. Yerim interrupted, her medical training apparently including a keen sense for when someone was trying to obscure the truth. "If this child is testifying that Mr. Dlamini was involved in forcibly displacing them from their shelter, that directly contradicts his claim of being a concerned family member searching for lost children." Officer Park, who had been looking increasingly uncomfortable with each new revelation, finally found his voice. "Mr. Dlamini, I'm going to need you to come to the station for additional questioning." "Attorney Choi, your client's testimony has some significant inconsistencies that need to be addressed." Makina's mask finally shattered completely. The concerned uncle vanished, replaced by something harder, more desperate. "You don't understand what you're dealing with. I was just following instructions. I was paid to keep track of them. Yes, but I never hurt them. I made sure they had what?" Xiongmin's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Had shelter in a contaminated industrial area? Had exposure to toxic waste that damaged a baby's lungs? Had just enough to survive but not enough to escape?" The silence that followed was broken by Jae-sung's phone buzzing again. He glanced at the screen, and his expression shifted from concern to something approaching horror. "Sir," Jae-sung said quietly, stepping close enough that only Xiongmin could hear. "I just received a message from our IT security team. They ran an audit after your call this morning. Oh Dalwung has been using a secondary email account, not the official corporate one, to communicate about Facility 7B. They found over 200 emails spanning 5 years, financial transfers, contracts with third-party security consultants, and," he paused, his voice dropping even lower, "there's communication about managing the immigrant situation dating back to when your father was still alive." The floor seemed to tilt beneath Xiongmin's feet. His father. Oh Dalwung had been his father's most trusted advisor, the man who had helped build Xiongmin Industrial from a regional manufacturer into a national player, the man who had stood beside his father's hospital bed during those final weeks, who had promised to guide Xiongmin through the transition, who had been like a second father himself. "The environmental violations weren't accidents," Xiongmin said, the pieces finally assembling into a picture he wished he couldn't see. "They were cost-cutting measures. Skip the proper disposal protocols, falsify the safety reports, and pocket the difference. But when the government started getting serious about environmental enforcement, he needed to cover his tracks," Jae-sung finished. "And if anyone was living in the contaminated areas, they became witnesses, potential evidence, liabilities." Through the hospital corridor windows, Xiongmin could see more news vans arriving. The lobby was filling with reporters, all of them sensing that this story was evolving into something bigger than a simple child welfare case. Corporate negligence, environmental crimes, human displacement. This was the kind of scandal that ended careers and sent executives to prison. His phone buzzed with an incoming call. Oh Dalwung again. This time Xiongmin answered and put it on speaker. "Xiongmin, I need you to listen very carefully." Dalwung's voice had lost all pretense of fatherly concern. "Whatever you think you've discovered, you need to understand that your father approved these cost management strategies. He knew. He signed off on the initial decisions. If you pursue this, you'll destroy his legacy along with the company he built." The words landed like physical blows. Xiongmin looked at Nalaya, at this small girl who had carried evidence in her pocket, because she'd learned that adults couldn't be trusted to do the right thing without proof. He thought about Amale struggling to breathe, about the toxicology reports showing contamination that should never have been there. My father is dead, Xiangmin said quietly. He can't answer for his decisions, but I'm alive, and I can answer for mine. Consider this your formal notification, Dal Wong. You're suspended pending investigation. Corporate security is already securing your files, and if you set foot in any Xiangmin industrial facility, you'll be arrested for trespassing. You're making a mistake. No, the mistake was made 5 years ago, or maybe 10 years ago, or maybe 30 years ago when my father decided profit margins mattered more than people's lives. I'm just finally doing something about it. He ended the call and turned to find Dr. Yerim watching him with an expression that might have been respect or might have been concern. Probably both. Mr. G, she said carefully, you realize what this means for your company, for your personal reputation. The media is going to tear this apart. Your board will likely move against you. I know. And he did. He could already envision the headlines, the stock price dropping, the lawsuits that would follow. The comfortable life he'd built was about to become very uncomfortable. But when he looked at Nalaya, she was staring at him with something new in her eyes. Not fear, not calculation. Something that looked dangerously close to hope. Officer Park cleared his throat. Mr. Dillamini, you're coming with me. Attorney Choi, if your client wants legal representation, that's his right. But he's not leaving this hospital until we get answers. He gestured to 2 additional officers who had arrived during the confrontation. And someone get forensics to examine those documents. I want to know if they're authentic, and who else might be implicated. As Makina was escorted away, his expensive coat suddenly looking like a costume that no longer fit, Nalaya moved closer to Seong-min, close enough that he could see she was trembling despite her brave face. You didn't have to do that, she whispered. You could have just walked away. Let someone else deal with the bad stuff. That's what everyone else always did. Seong-min crouched down again, his knees protesting but his resolve firm. Your mother, he said gently, before she passed away, did she ever tell you anything about what you should do if you needed help? Nalaya nodded slowly. She said to find someone who keeps their promises, even when it's hard, even when it costs them something. She said those people are rare, but they're the only ones worth trusting. The weight of that responsibility settled over Seong-min, like a mantle he hadn't asked for, but couldn't refuse. Then I'll try to be worth trusting. Behind them, through the window of Amali's room, the baby stirred in her sleep, her breathing easier now with proper medical care, unaware that the world around her was shifting in ways that might finally offer something resembling justice. Jae-sung approached with his tablet. Sir, the IT team just sent the full audit report. You need to see this. The trail goes deeper than Dal Wong. There are other executives involved, other facilities. This isn't an isolated incident. It's systematic. Seong-min took the tablet, scanning through pages of evidence that represented years of choices, of looking the other way, of prioritizing efficiency over ethics. His father's legacy was there, yes, but so was his own. Every report he'd signed without questioning, every audit he'd approved without digging deeper. The difference was, now he could choose differently. The rain started at 3 a.m, not the gentle spring rain that Korean poets wrote about, but the harsh, punishing kind that felt like the sky itself was disappointed. Seong-min stood at the window of the hospital's family consultation room, watching water stream down the glass in patterns that reminded him uncomfortably of tears. Behind him, scattered across the table, lay printed copies of every incriminating document the IT audit had uncovered. Spreadsheets showing diverted environmental compliance funds, emails discussing cost optimization that really meant dumping toxic waste in unauthorized locations, contracts with shell companies that existed only to provide plausible deniability, and threaded through it all, like poison in a water supply, were his father's initials. Not on every document. His father had been too smart for that, but on enough of them to make denial impossible. Ji Tae-sung had known. Perhaps not every detail. Perhaps not the full scope of the corruption. But he had known that corners were being cut, that protocols were being ignored, that people might be hurt. And he had signed off anyway, because the quarterly reports looked better that way, because investors preferred profit margins to environmental responsibility, because it was easier to not ask questions when the answers might be uncomfortable. Seong-min had spent the past 6 hours reading through his father's legacy, and with each page, he felt something inside him crumble. Not the sharp break of sudden betrayal, but the slow erosion of a foundation he'd built his entire adult identity upon. His father had been his hero, the man who'd built an empire from nothing, who'd preached integrity and hard work, who'd told young Seong-min that their family name meant something, stood for something. But what had it really stood for? Profit at any cost? Success that left children breathing toxic air? A legacy built on other people's suffering? The consultation room door opened quietly. Dr. Yerim entered carrying 2 paper cups of coffee from the hospital's all-night vending machine. She didn't say anything at first, just set 1 cup beside Seong-min and stood next to him at the window. "You haven't slept," she observed. "Neither have you. I'm used to it. Pediatric emergency medicine trains you to function on caffeine and stubbornness." She paused. "But you're not used to this, are you? This kind of moral collapse." Moral collapse. The words were too accurate, too precise. Seong-min took a sip of the terrible coffee and welcomed the bitterness. "My father used to tell me a story," he said quietly, his voice rough from hours of not speaking, about how, when he first started the company, he worked 18-hour days in a factory so small you could hear every machine running at once. He said he learned everyone's name, every worker, every supplier, every person who contributed to building something. He said that's what separated good business from great business, remembering that numbers on a spreadsheet represented actual human lives. "And then," Yerim prompted gently, "and then the company grew. The factories got bigger. The workforce expanded into the thousands. The spreadsheets got longer, and the human lives got smaller, easier to overlook, easier to categorize as acceptable losses or necessary sacrifices for growth." Seong-min's hand tightened around the coffee cup. "I don't know when it happened. When he stopped seeing people and started seeing only numbers. Or maybe he never stopped seeing people. Maybe he just decided that some people mattered less than others." Through the rain-streaked window, he could see the hospital parking lot where news vans had maintained their vigil all night. Reporters taking shifts, waiting for the next development in a story that had exploded across national media. "Corporate dynasty built on environmental crimes," read one headline. "Children's lives risked for profit," proclaimed another. His face was everywhere, the wealthy heir who'd stumbled onto his own family's sins. "The worst part," Seong-min continued, his reflection in the window looking like a stranger, "is that I benefited from all of it. Every privilege I had, every opportunity, every advantage. It was purchased with money that came from decisions like these. I went to the best schools, wore the best clothes, traveled the world, all while children like Nalaya and Amale were breathing poison, because it was cheaper than doing things right." "You didn't know," Yerim said. "Didn't I?" The question came out sharper than he intended. Or did I just not ask? Did I see the quarterly reports showing unusually high profit margins and think, "Father is brilliant," instead of, "How is this possible?" Did I attend board meetings where environmental compliance costs were discussed, and simply nod along when Dalwong assured everyone that everything was being handled appropriately? He turned away from the window to face the scattered documents. "I'm not innocent, Dr. Han. I'm complicit. Maybe not in the planning, maybe not in the execution, but in the willful ignorance that let it continue. I inherited my father's company, and never questioned whether I'd also inherited his sins." Yerim was quiet for a long moment, studying him with those sharp physician's eyes that had probably diagnosed hundreds of ailments, physical and otherwise. "So what will you do now?" "I don't know." The admission felt like pulling out a splinter that had been festering for years. "Every instinct I have, every business lesson I learned, tells me to minimize the damage. Issue a carefully worded statement. Blame the subordinates. Distance myself from the worst of it. Settle quietly with anyone who might sue. That's what my lawyers are advising. That's what the board wants. That's what would protect the company and my family name. But every time I think about doing that, I see Nalaya's face, the way she looked at me when I promised to help her sister, the trust in her eyes when I said I'd keep my word." Seong-min's voice cracked slightly. "How do I look at her and tell her that protecting my company's reputation matters more than acknowledging what was done to her?" A sound from the doorway made them both turn. Nalaya stood there, small and silent in donated pajamas that were still too big, her hair tangled from sleep. How long had she been listening? "You're awake," Yerim said gently. "Is everything all right?" "Is Amala?" "She's sleeping. The nurse is with her." Nalaya's eyes were fixed on Seong-min, unreadable, I heard voices. I thought maybe you'd left." The words hit like a physical blow. Of course she'd thought that. Every adult in her life had left eventually. Through death, through abandonment, through simply deciding she wasn't worth the trouble. "I'm still here," Seong-min said, and realized how inadequate the words were. Nalaya walked into the room, her bare feet silent on the linoleum floor. She looked at the documents spread across the table, at the evidence of systematic negligence and deliberate harm. She couldn't read all of it. Her Korean was still learning, her English better, but not fluent. But she understood enough. She understood what it meant to see your father's name on papers that caused pain. "My mother used to say something," Nalaya said quietly, her small voice filling the room with unexpected weight. "She said that shame is what you feel when you realize you've been wrong, but what matters is what you do after the shame. If you just hide from it, it turns into poison. But if you face it, if you try to fix what was broken, then maybe the shame can turn into something else. Something like growing up." Seong-min felt his throat tighten. Wisdom from a dead woman delivered by an 11-year-old child, and it cut deeper than any business advice he'd ever received. "Your mother sounds like she was very wise," he managed. "She was scared a lot," Nalaya said, "and sad. But she never pretended things were okay when they weren't. She never lied to make us feel better." The girl's eyes met his directly, unflinching. "So please don't lie to me now. Are you going to fix this? Or are you going to do what the other men in suits always do? Say sorry with your mouth, but not with your actions." The question hung in the air like a judgment. Seong-min looked at this child who had survived things that should have broken her, who had carried evidence in her pocket because she'd learned that hope required proof, who had the courage to ask the questions that adults usually avoided. And he realized with sudden crystal clarity that he'd been asking himself the wrong question. The question wasn't whether he could afford to do the right thing. The question was whether he could afford not to. "I'm going to fix it," he said, and felt the words settle into his bones like an oath. "Not all at once. Not perfectly. But I'm going to try, even if it costs everything." Nalaya studied his face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Okay, I believe you." But the next words out of her mouth made his newfound resolve feel fragile. "Just don't disappear while you're fixing things. Amali, she's starting to smile when she sees you. She doesn't smile for strangers. Only for people she thinks will stay." 3 weeks had passed since that rain-soaked morning when Nalaya had asked Seong-min not to disappear. 21 days that had felt like 21 years, each one packed with press conferences, legal depositions, board meetings that turned into battlegrounds, and late-night hospital visits that had become the only moments when Seong-min felt like he was doing something that actually mattered. The investigation had moved with surprising speed once the evidence became public. Oh Da-woong had been formally arrested on charges of environmental crimes, fraud, and conspiracy. 3 other senior executives had been suspended. The prosecutor's office had opened cases on 5 different Seong-min industrial facilities, uncovering a pattern of negligence that stretched back over a decade. But speed in investigation didn't mean speed in justice. The legal process would take years. The environmental cleanup would take longer, and the children caught in the middle of it all couldn't wait for courts to decide their fate. Seong-min stood outside the hospital's main entrance on a Thursday afternoon that felt too beautiful for the weight it carried. Cherry blossoms were beginning to bloom along the sidewalk, those iconic Korean spring flowers that tourists photographed and poets romanticized. The petals drifted down like pink snow, landing on his shoulders, on the concrete, on the car that waited to take Amale and Nalaya to their next destination. Not home, not yet, maybe never in the way most people understood the word, but somewhere safer than a contaminated industrial zone, somewhere with heat and clean air, and adults who had been thoroughly vetted by 3 different agencies. Dr. Yerim emerged from the hospital pushing a wheelchair that held Amale. The baby looked so different from that first night, color in her cheeks now, breathing easy with only minimal support, her eyes bright and curious instead of dulled by respiratory distress. She wore new clothes, a stuffed rabbit tucked under one arm, and when she saw Seong-min, her face broke into that smile Nalaya had mentioned, the smile that still felt like an undeserved gift every time he saw it. Nalaya walked beside the wheelchair, one hand resting protectively on her sister's shoulder. She'd grown in 3 weeks, not physically, but in some indefinable way that suggested the constant terror of survival had eased just enough to let other parts of her personality emerge. She'd started asking questions about everything: how traffic lights worked, why some trees lost leaves and others didn't, what happened to rain after it went down the drain. Questions that normal 11-year-old children asked when they felt safe enough to be curious instead of vigilant. "All her discharge paperwork is complete," Yerim said, though her professional tone couldn't quite hide the emotion underneath. Pediatric doctors weren't supposed to get attached to patients, but some cases made that impossible. She'll need follow-up appointments every 2 weeks for the first 2 months, then monthly after that. The respiratory therapist put together a care plan that the foster family has reviewed. Foster family, temporary placement. Legal terminology for a situation that felt anything but temporary to the people living through it. Seungmin crouched down beside the wheelchair, bringing himself to Amali's eye level. The baby reached out and grabbed his tie, an expensive silk piece that now had small handprints on it from previous encounters. He'd stopped wearing his most expensive ties after the first week, learning that babies didn't care about designer labels. "Hey there, little one," he said softly. "Ready for your adventure?" Amale babbled something that might have been agreement, or might have just been happy sounds, but her grip on his tie suggested she wasn't ready to let go just yet. Nalaya watched this interaction with an expression Seungmin had learned to read over the past weeks. Hope mixed with fear, trust tangled up with the expectation of disappointment. She'd been through too much to believe in fairy tale endings, but she hadn't been through so much that she'd stopped wanting them. "The foster parents seem nice," Nalaya said carefully, as if testing the words for truth. "Mrs. Park used to be a teacher. Mr. Park works at a library. They have a dog named Butter, because he's yellow. They are nice," Seungmin confirmed. He'd personally interviewed them twice, run background checks that went beyond the standard requirements, and made it clear that he would be maintaining close contact with the children's care. "And you have my phone number. All 3 of my phone numbers, including the one that only 5 people in the world have." "I know." She pulled the small phone he'd given her from her pocket. A simple model, nothing fancy, but it represented a lifeline, a way to reach him if things went wrong. "You made me practice calling it 6 times. 7 times, Seungmin corrected with the hint of a smile. "You're forgetting the time you called to ask if penguins could fly. That was an important question." A ghost of humor flickered across her face before fading. "Mr. G, will you really come visit? Even when the reporters stop following you? Even when your company doesn't need us anymore for good publicity?" The question hit harder than it should have. She'd learned to see through adult promises, to identify the difference between temporary kindness and lasting commitment. And she was testing him now, giving him an out, preparing herself for the inevitable disappointment. Seungmin stood up and looked directly at her. "Nalaya, I can't promise everything will be perfect. I can't promise the legal system will move quickly, or that the foster placement will work out exactly as planned. I can't even promise that I'll always know the right thing to do." Her expression started to close off. There it was, the familiar defense mechanism activating. "But," he continued, "I can promise that I won't disappear. I made a choice that night in the snow. I meant it then, and I mean it now. You and Amali are not a publicity strategy. You're not a problem to be solved and forgotten. You're 2 people who deserve someone who keeps showing up, even when it's complicated. Especially when it's complicated." Tears welled in Nalaya's eyes, the first real tears he'd seen from her in 3 weeks of daily visits. She'd cried when the doctors hurt her during examinations, had shed quiet tears while watching her sister struggle to breathe, but she'd never cried like this. These were different tears, cleaner somehow. "Why?" she whispered. "Why us? Why did you stop that night? You could have just driven past. You could have called someone else to help. Why did you get out of your car?" Seungmin had asked himself that question 100 times over the past weeks. He'd analyzed it, searched for logical explanations, tried to understand what impulse had made him break in the snow instead of continuing home to his warm apartment and comfortable life. "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe because your sister needed help. Maybe because you asked in a way that made it impossible to say no. Or maybe—" He paused, trying to articulate something he barely understood himself. "Maybe because sometimes we don't choose the moments that change us. They choose us, and we either rise to meet them, or we spend the rest of our lives wondering what would have happened if we'd been brave enough to try." Mrs. Park emerged from the hospital then, a warm-faced woman in her 50s, with the kind of gentle competence that came from years of managing classrooms full of children. Her husband followed, carrying a car seat that had been carefully installed and safety checked 3 times. "Are we ready?" Mrs. Park asked, her voice carrying the practiced cheer of someone who understood that transitions were hard for traumatized children. "Butter is very excited to meet you both. We've been teaching him his gentlest behavior." Nalaya looked at Seong-min one more time. A long look that felt like she was memorizing his face, cataloging this moment in case it turned out to be the last one. "You promise you'll visit?" she asked again, needing the words repeated, needing the reassurance. "I promise. This Saturday. And every Saturday after that until you get tired of seeing me." "What if I never get tired?" "Then I guess you're stuck with me." Something shifted in her expression. Not quite belief, not quite trust, but maybe the beginning of both. She nodded slowly, then walked over and did something that surprised everyone. She hugged him, quick and awkward, her thin arms barely reaching around his waist, lasting only 3 seconds before she pulled away, as if embarrassed by her own vulnerability. But those 3 seconds felt like absolution. As the Park's car pulled away with Amale and Nalaya inside, the baby waving, the girl looking back through the rear window, Seong-min stood among the falling cherry blossoms and felt the weight of an imperfect promise settle over him. Not a promise of perfection, not a guarantee of happiness, just a commitment to keep showing up, keep trying, keep choosing the harder path because 2 children had looked at him and decided he might be worth trusting. "Doctor." Yerim stood beside him, watching the car disappear around the corner. "You know this is just the beginning, right? The custody process, the therapy they'll need, the questions about permanent placement. It's all ahead of you. I know. And your company is still in crisis. The board is voting next week on whether to force you out. The lawsuits are piling up. Your father's reputation is destroyed, which means yours is too by association. I know that too." She smiled slightly. "But you're going to keep going anyway." It wasn't a question, but Seong-min answered it. "I don't really have a choice anymore. Or maybe I do, and I'm finally making the right one." His phone buzzed. A message from Nalaya, sent from her new phone. "Butter is very soft. Thank you for everything. See you Saturday?" He typed back. "See you Saturday. Save some butter cuddles for me." 3 dots appeared then. "Okay, don't be late." "I won't." And for the first time in 3 weeks, maybe for the first time in years, Seong-min felt something that wasn't quite peace, but was close enough. Not resolution, not a happy ending tied up in a neat bow, just the quiet satisfaction of knowing that when life had presented him with a choice, when a child's voice had cut through the snow and asked him to save her sister, he had stopped the car. He had gotten out. He had chosen to help. And now he would live with that choice. All its complications, all its costs, all its unexpected grace, for as long as it took. When a single night of cold wind can rewrite the course of 2 young lives, we are reminded of how fragile the world truly is. Nalaya stood in that snow, not because she was fearless, but because love pushed her beyond her limits. And Seong-min stepped forward, not because he was a hero, but because sometimes life gives us a moment in which we must choose who we are willing to become. In their quiet collision, 2 very different souls were forced to confront truths they had spent years avoiding. But what would you have done in Nalaya's place, holding the weight of a sister's life with no warmth left except your own resolve? And if you were in Seong-min's position, facing the consequences of choices you never meant to harm anyone, would you have looked away or stepped toward the pain you helped create? These are not questions with simple answers. They are mirrors we hold up to ourselves. Every story leaves behind a trace, a reminder that the smallest decision can echo for years. And sometimes the greatest act of strength is not to rise triumphant, but simply to stay, to listen, to protect, even when the world expects something else. As you leave this story behind, ask yourself, in a moment of truth, who would you choose to be?